Hello, everybody. My name's John, and welcome to today's webinar, where we'll be talking about one of the hottest technologies of the last 12 months, which is artificial intelligence, or AI for short. And what we're going to be exploring today is the impact of AI in the digital experience insight space. And we're also going to be looking forward to how we expect the industry to be shaped by this new technology. So today, I'm joined by Mohannad Ali, CEO of Hotjar. I'm really lucky to have the chance to pick Mo's brain today, and I'm really glad that you can all be here for this conversation. So thank you very much for joining us, Mo.
Thank you, John, for having me. Super excited to be with all of you here today to have this, interesting discussion about, I think, what is, for me, also like a very, very interesting topic. And I think there's a lot for us to cover. So hopefully we'll give you an interesting webinar today.
Great. I couldn't agree more. So before we get started, what we're going to do is run a really quick poll here in Zoom because we want to gauge your expectations from this session. So we're going to run that poll for you now. And if you wouldn't mind taking a few seconds to respond to these 4 questions, we'd really appreciate that. They should have popped up on your screen now. And while the folks are doing that, how's your week been so far, Mo?
It's good. It's good. I'm going on vacation tomorrow, actually, for a week. So the days before vacation are always a bit crammed. So it's been a little bit busy, but otherwise it's the summer time. It's my favorite time of the year. So it's really good. How is yours? How is your week going?
Yeah, really good. Thank you. It's uncharacteristically sunny here in the UK, so the country's gone into a meltdown, but I've got a fan here by my side. So yeah, we're all good. Where are you off on holiday?
I'm going back home actually to Egypt, meeting some old high school friends for a bit. So it's gonna be fun.
Fantastic. That sounds great. Okay, so if you haven't done so already, you should see a poll on screen to fill out just a few questions to gauge your expectations. But without further ado, let's dive into the questions that we've got for Mo. So generative AI, being one of the versions of AI, is a real breakthrough, and the use cases are endless for it. So from your point of view, Mo, what are the limitations of AI for the time being?
That's a great question. So the mental model that I try to use to think about what AI in general is able to do, and in particular generative AI, I think there are probably like 3 levels of utility that AI could provide. The first level of utility, I like to think of it in terms of that AI can do what a very large number of, let's say, interns can do. So, inexperienced, not necessarily very knowledgeable people of a particular topic, but you have an infinite number of these people, right? So that's kind of data entry, data aggregation, like doing some organization or research, things like that. So this is definitely something that AI can do. Then you go into level 2, which is when you compare now not to an intern, but kind of like an averagely knowledgeable person. But instead of like being one person knowledgeable of one topic, we have also an infinite number of people that are knowledgeable of many topics, but they are not necessarily experts in any particular topic. And I think that's a lot of the breakthrough that we've been seeing recently. Level 3, which I think we're not there yet, is AI replacing someone who is an expert on a particular topic, or someone who is very knowledgeable, very deep into a particular topic. I don't think AI right now has the capability of replacing that judgment that comes from experience and from the depth in a particular topic. Secondly, I think there's another limitation that I would like to mention, especially related to the large language models. You've seen a lot of articles that talk about these hallucinations of things like ChatGPT or Bard. And what they refer to as hallucinations is these AIs referencing things that haven't existed or stating facts that are not factually true. And because I think people forget that these models are ultimately statistical models that use mathematical probability to predict what would be the sequence of words that make sense. So it's not always entirely accurate because it's not necessarily based on unequivocal facts, that it's basing all of these answers to. There was a really cool example that I recently read on the BBC where some US lawyers were using ChatGPT for research, and they actually use that research in actual court case, but the references of case law that the ChatGPT produced were fictitious cases, like they didn't really exist, and they're actually risking now getting disbarred for using this. So I think it's this level of accuracy when it comes to like really specific expert topics, then becomes a bit more difficult. Yeah.
That's interesting. I really like the model that you laid out there of the different things that AI could potentially help us with. And I can see how each of them are helpful, and I can see how we're not quite there at the expert judgment level yet. And yeah, that's a fascinating case study about the lawyer, the BBC article. Okay, so following on from that, how do you think AI technologies will impact jobs in tech? So is AI likely to take over any of the jobs in tech?
Yeah. I'm not entirely sure it would take over. I don't like to think in terms of taking over jobs in particular. I think AI is actually a great opportunity for all of us to think about how it can augment the jobs that we do. I think having these kind of AI assistant or assistants, plural, because again, this idea of this having an infinite number of, AI assistants, I think this is something that can really maximize your productivity by factors of 10x or more. So I think that's really what we're gonna see quite a lot of. I personally believe in the importance of human judgment in most of the knowledge work jobs that we do. So I think that's something that would be very difficult for AI to replace, at least on the short to medium term. I think it takes a lot more advancement for us to get there. That being said, though, but I don't want to sound alarmist. I don't necessarily believe in like the AI doom and all of these things, but definitely what we've seen over the last century or so is that with more advancement in automation, we see certain jobs evolving. Some jobs are perhaps becoming more obsolete. Some jobs are changing. Some entirely new jobs are being created. So I think it would be naive also for us to expect that there will be no impact on the jobs landscape. There will definitely be some impact on the jobs landscape. Yeah.
That makes sense. And I think anyone that's used AI tools has probably seen examples of AI getting it a little bit wrong. Like I've had Grammarly suggest things that don't quite make sense in the context. So that's where that human judgment definitely still comes in. So I think that makes a lot of sense. To follow up on one of the points that you made there, I'm taking notes here as you're answering. Have you come across or used any AI tools that help with your productivity? You mentioned like an AI assistant would be an incredibly helpful thing for people to have.
Absolutely. I'm trying to look for ways where there's actually like real utility for AI in my workflow. So one of the tools that I like to use is Notion, and they've integrated AI into the product in a very nice way. So I find myself often using that AI to summarize text, to suggest alternatives, and so on. So it has been really great in condensing information for me, so that I use for as an assistant in my note taking and so on. Another example that is really interesting, I haven't tried it myself, but one of the things that I think I want to try, you see it actually in the chat, the first probably chat message we got here, someone is using an AI assistant to help take notes for this meeting and to transcribe it. And I think that's one of the use cases that I think would be super powerful. Imagine having like multiple AI assistants who are able to attend, for example, from my vantage point as the CEO of the company, imagine I have assistants that can attend different department meetings, have different, be part of certain conversations and so on, and be able to consolidate and aggregate and tell me like, these are the top 3 problems in the team today that you need to work with. But also I find myself using ChatGPT quite a lot. Oftentimes when I need to like brainstorm or think of something creative, especially when I'm trying to write, I always try to run some ideas with ChatGPT. And very recently I was coming up with an itinerary for a trip I'm planning in August, and I didn't want to go through Googling and so on, and I just gave a prompt to ChatGPT with all my requirements, and it gave me an amazing itinerary actually for the trip. So I think it's also like that utility I'm finding saving me a lot of time, also not just in my professional life, but also in my personal life.
That's amazing. Yeah, they're really good examples. I've played around with Notion AI and particularly for summaries found that really useful. But
Yeah.
the meeting thing is really interesting, like coming back off of annual leave, for example, and you've missed like some big department meetings or some company all hands, instead of sitting through like an hour and a half recording for each of those things, getting like an AI summary of those would be fantastic.
Yeah,
And
actually, it's perfect idea. Like coming back to what did I miss? Kind of like what prompt you get this condensed summary. Yeah, I think it's amazing.
awesome. Thank you very much for those tips. So, which skills would you recommend folks work on to stay competitive in this new AI landscape in tech?
All right. Uh, um, to answer this question, I think you can think of AI in two different ways, or choose one of two different mindsets to think about this. I think one, there's a camp of people that think of AI as this imminent threat that is, coming to steal our jobs and destroy, the job market and so on. And I don't necessarily subscribe to that camp. The other camp that I subscribe to, as you see already from the conversation we're having, is that I think there is a huge opportunity to have this infinite army of qualified help to help you become better at your job. So with this perspective, what can you do with this information to help you be ready for this kind of transformation? One, I would say sharpen your skills to really become an expert on a domain or a topic. Having that very deep understanding of this particular domain and having the ability to practice good judgment over an extended period of time is something that is very difficult for AI to replace, but also positions you well to be able to make the best out of the AI resources that can support you, because you know where to point the AI to help you and like find the right value. Two, similar to the point that you were just making right now, John, incorporating AI in your workflow and getting used to delegating parts of your role, I think is super important. Like I'm not necessarily a maximalist of AI or new technology in general, but I feel, like similar to, like, let's say take a step back and go back in history with the invention of computers and spreadsheets and so on. Like if you were someone, still doing mathematical calculations on pen and paper, where everyone else is getting on that train of doing advanced computation with a computer, then, if to use that analogy now, if you're doing the equivalent of that pen and paper today and not getting on the trend and learning the skills that are necessary, then that could be bad news for you, right? Because you may be left behind where everyone else has this edge of being more productive and more efficient than you. And the last point I'd like to make, and this may be controversial, especially with seeing things like GitHub Copilot and what ChatGPT can do in terms of helping people code better. I, as someone who has a background in engineering, I still have very strong conviction that learning to code is one of the most essential skills. And I think it is a superpower to really be able to program and like understand how system works. But of course, with AI, you can do this much faster and you can be a lot more efficient. But I still think it's a super valuable skill to have.
That makes a lot of sense. So, becoming an expert so that you can exercise judgment that AI hasn't got to the level of being able to do yet, that makes a lot of sense. Building AI into your workflow, so learning how to hand things off, how to create good prompts. I think I saw a job title for as a prompt creator. I saw that as a
I've
thing,
seen
so
that too.
I can see that becoming useful. And learning to code, that's a really interesting one as well, because as you say, that's something that we're getting a lot more AI assistance to be able to do. I've actually used AI for that myself. Are there any particular areas of code, be it like basic HTML, CSS, JavaScript, or maybe data stuff like SQL? Which areas do you think would be most useful to focus on going forwards?
But a quick comment on the idea of like prompt designers or engineers. I think these are some of these hype related or fad parts of the cycle that I would not bet any money that this would be like I think it's more ephemeral, these kind of roles. But to answer your question on the programming, if we look at the history of how people have learned programming, it used to be this thing that had like a high barrier to entry. You have to go through university to learn how to program. You need to have a degree, to have a job in programming, and so on. And with the popularity of self-study through the internet, we've seen that barrier to entry in programming drop pretty low, where most people can produce functional code very quickly and very easily. That being said, I think if we really dissect the spectrum of jobs you find in programming, there has always been, even with that kind of low barrier to entry, there has always been a type of software jobs that require some deeper understanding of the fundamentals. And these fundamentals of how systems are built, how the architecture works, and so on, usually, like very rarely, one would run into them. For example, if you're working as a programmer building an e-commerce website, it's not that likely that that difference in understanding of fundamentals will make a big impact on your productivity or your efficiency at work or your even career progression. But now that like the commodity part or the easier part of programming is offloaded to AI and becoming even easier to do, I think that understanding of fundamentals and understanding of like systems architecture and so on can give you that edge to really understand how to build a software system that is better than others. I think building software is equal parts science, equal parts like good judgment, but also there is definitely a component of creativity, where it is still a process of building something. And like building anything, there's always like preferences and choices that make a difference from one system to the other.
That makes sense. It's so as those easier or more routine parts get commoditized, it's stepping back and looking at the bigger picture, again coming back to that theme of judgment, creativity, as well as the technical skills. So that makes a lot of sense. Awesome. So how do you think this revolution will impact the way that we do user research specifically and understand user experience?
The user research field and understanding user experience is a lot about understanding the feedback and the behavior from your users, right? Like you have all of this behavior that comes more quantitatively, but you also have a lot of the qualitative feedback through survey answers, through reviews, through interactions with the customer, and so on. And what we've seen AI recently do is we've seen AI getting really good at being able to analyze very large volumes of these types of data sets. So if I would think about the different ways this can impact that field, I would say one, it would definitely enhance this the understanding of the customer by analyzing these large amounts of data from different sources. So because the more you consume in terms of data about your customer and be able to analyze them very quickly, the more you develop like a deeper understanding. But two, also some of that understanding and analysis can happen in real time, which we are not necessarily always able to do today. So enabling business to be able to capture and respond to trends immediately is something that would be very powerful. Sentiment analysis is another one. Machine learning and AI before these big leaps have already been doing parts of that to an acceptable degree of accuracy that is sometimes very difficult to achieve based on the business and so on. Where you see it's actually getting much better and will continue to get better over time. Being able to predict trends also in that analysis, to be able to forecast what's going to happen, doing this predictive analytics, leveraging historical data would be, in my opinion, very important. And now going into this conversational part of AI, which we've seen in ChatGPT and so on, we will see more conversational kind of use cases or like chatbots and so on, where we have a much higher quality of these kind of interactions between the AI and the human customer or user. And then finally, if you put all of this together, what you realize is that you will be able to provide a much higher level of personalized experiences for your customers. I've heard some stories, for example, about some of the use cases that could be interesting, where you may not only get like an AI that understands your context, speaks your language and so on, but also maybe has even regional relevance to you, maybe talks to you in your accent, for example, you know, like these kind of things. So we can get to the world of hyper personalization where every experience is specifically curated for you and only for you.
That's a really exciting vision of the future, and at the rate of acceleration, I think it's not going to be long before we start to see some of that, which is really cool. So we know that a lot of folks have been curious to know more about Hotjar AI. So can you tell us a little bit more about what Hotjar AI is?
Cool. I've been waiting for this moment in the webinar. So for those of you who don't know, today we had a big launch of Hotjar AI. You for the users of Hotjar, you got an email from us. Some of you may have seen it on Product Hunt. If you haven't gone to Product Hunt yet, please make sure you go and upvote us. We would like to have your support there. But what is it about? So we talked a lot today, John and I, about the idea of having this AI helper or assistant that can help you become a lot more productive. And this is exactly what we're built for our customers, especially when it comes to the survey product. So this product today in its version, the first version that we're releasing is focused on the surveys product in Hotjar Ask. And we have this research assistant that helps you in two very meaningful ways. The first one is a survey generator. A lot of our users want to understand better why their customers, for example, are struggling, or they want to get their feedback about a particular area. But we see them quite a lot getting stuck in thinking about, okay, what questions should I ask? How many questions should I ask? Like, what are the different type of questions and so on? So it's a bit time consuming for them and requires a lot of cognitive load. Now, this is a one-click experience. You either tell the AI what is it that you want to achieve from the survey, or you can pick from some of the pre-selected goals that we have set, and the AI will do it in 1 second. Now, on the other end of that survey, you've collected thousands of responses. We've seen our users like sifting through lots of feedback, exporting things, putting it in Excel, putting it in like different data analysis tools and trying to make sense of it. All of this now is one click. You can just say, send it to the AI, generate a report for you. It will tell you the summary of everything, the key findings, but also it will recommend some next steps in terms of what you should do to improve this. So we're super excited. It's only step one for us. I'm sure there will be more releases for our team in the future, but definitely really excited about this one. We've been getting amazing customer feedback so far from it.
Amazing. Yeah, that's really exciting. And I can see how that takes away that like blank slate fear of not knowing where to start. So maybe we should show people what it's all
Let's
about.
do it. Yeah,
let's
show them. I'm sure they wanna see it.
Fantastic. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to walk you through this. So first of all, we're going to start off with the survey question generator, as Mo was just talking about. So here I'm in my Hotjar account, and on the left-hand side, I've gone to surveys. And previously, you would have just seen this new survey button where you can go in and pick a template or create from scratch. But now we have this create it for me with AI button. So I'm going to click here, and let's throw some context to this. So let's say that I've just launched an e-commerce store, it's starting to get some traction, but up until now, people have had no way to leave feedback on their experience. And I want to learn more about how they're getting on my site. So I'm going to go for one of these pre-made prompts, measure user satisfaction, and then I'm going to click create the survey. Asking for user feedback in this way is absolutely vital. And as you can see already, that's given us a bunch of questions. So let's take a look at these answers. First of all, how satisfied are you with the product? That's a really great way to gauge overall. And we've got different question types. So it's not just going to give you the same type of question. It's going to utilize the different question types that are available here within Hotjar. We've got a rating of overall user experience. And then we've also got a product question here. We've got a short text answer, so we're going to get some open text feedback here. The primary reason for your satisfaction or dissatisfaction, again, space for people to expand on the answer that they're given. So we're getting both qualitative and quantitative feedback. And that was incredibly easy to do. There are a few different things that you can do once you've got these questions. You're able to change the type of the survey. So this could be a popover survey that comes in the corner. we recently released this button type. So it looks like the feedback widget, but it's got all the functionality of surveys, full screen, or link surveys if you want to send them out in emails, etc. You can edit the questions. You can change some of the text. If you're not happy with the answers or the prompts, then you can go in and change those. You can also add images. So there's a lot that you can do once this has been generated. It's not the case that you have to go with exactly what the AI tool comes up with, but it's a great starting place for you to then go ahead and customize. Anything to add there, Mo, to this demo?
You covered it pretty well.
Fantastic. Okay, just a reminder again, we're taking questions in the Q&A, so feel free to pop your questions in there if you do have any. And let's say I've gone ahead and created this survey. We've left it live on my e-commerce site for a week or so, and now we've gathered some responses, and we want to take a look at that. Here, we're going to demonstrate the second section of Hotjar AI, which is the report generation. As you can see, this is a survey that we created earlier, so it's important to point out these aren't real responses, but we went in and created this for the purpose of this demo. But what we've got here is a survey where we've collected 30 responses, and we've got a combination of quantitative and qualitative feedback in these survey responses. And we want to get an overview of what these 30 responses say in a really sort of short space of time. So the team have gone ahead and generated this report for us. And what I can do is click View Report to take a look. We've got a summary of the key findings of what customers appreciate, and also some improvements such as enhancing the docs, offline access, collaboration features, import and export. You get a summary of the key findings just here. You get some quotes that people gave as part of their feedback so that you can see what customers are really saying in their own words. And then this is the part that I find really cool is you get next steps. So you've got the data. Now, what do you do with it? AI takes that feedback and suggests some things that you could look at or delegate out to your team in terms of actually acting on this feedback, because feedback is all well and good, but until you put it into action and change things, you know, it's just sat there. So this is a really useful prompt to help you take action on what you've gathered here in your survey. Cool. Again, Mo, anything else to add to these cool new features?
Just one thing, that both features are now available for free, so you can start using them today. And yeah, I hope you like them.
Fantastic. A couple of little points to add here. If you then gather a bunch of new responses, and if this is an ongoing piece of research, you can generate a new report to take into account the new responses that have come in. And if this is the first time that you've generated a report for a particular survey, let's go to another one that we haven't generated a report. You're going to see a generate report button there instead of the report button that we were seeing here. So just a couple of technical bits there. Great. So I have one last question for Mo. But before I do that, I wanted to invite you all to submit your questions via the Zoom Q&A. I can see that we've got some questions coming in there already, but just wanted to give you that final chance to jump in and ask some questions. I'll be picking out some questions to ask Mo. So if you want to ask anything, go ahead and throw it in there. So Mo, here's your final question. What are your future predictions on AI-powered technologies that will improve UX in digital platforms?
When I think about the experience of like the UX in general, I think it goes beyond the screens that we use today, whether it's desktop or mobile and so on. One of the use cases that I think we haven't been able to do pretty well so far is the voice interfaces and conversational AI, right? Conversational AI today, even in the form of chat, is pretty good. But if you think of voice assistants like Alexa or Siri and so on, they've always been pretty limited. But I think right now with these leaps in AI, we will have a lot more powerful conversational AI that is with voice interfaces that will allow us to interact with computers in natural language with voice and achieve a lot more than we were able to achieve before that. Building on that as well, I think that will open up a lot of value and use cases for augmented reality and virtual reality. I like to think that the science fiction around augmented reality and virtual reality is actually like a pretty good compass probably for where we want to go. So if you think of Iron Man and Jarvis and like that idea of a really smart computer that is that you interact only through voice with, I think that would be something that's really powerful. And now we will see, I think, more and more of this. Like if you look at the Vision Pro headset from Apple, for example, what they have done is that they have reduced the interactions to basically just eye movement and pinching. And that's already, and of course, like there'll be some voice, but if we were able to do a lot more voice in this, I think that will open up a lot more use cases. And then finally, one of my big predictions on this is that I think we will see a lot of evolution in the ethics and transparency around AI. Today, it's really a black box without necessarily the enough guardrails of discourse. We're still figuring this out. It's a very nascent technology. We don't know how to create like the right level of accountability. How do we align that development to like the different ethical principles of the different players or parties in the conversation? So I predict there will be a lot more focus on ensuring fairness, transparency, privacy, and more importantly, trust in an AI-powered experience, because we've all seen a lot of the reports of how actually AI could pull us in the wrong direction in terms of trust and misinformation and so on. So I think that's something that will be a big part of that future.
That makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of people are probably rightly concerned about that final point that you made around trust and ethics and what we can expect from AI. In that sense, it's a bit of a black box, as you say. But yeah, voice is a really exciting avenue for where AI is going to go next. And I think we've all seen from Siri and Alexa how that can. Sorry if I just triggered a bunch of devices on people's in people's offices. Of how that can, be really useful for people. So thank you very much for sharing your thoughts there with us. So what we're going to do now is jump into a Q&A session. I'm going to take a look at the questions that have come in, and I think we've highlighted some to be asked. So I'm going to pull those out and ask them. So let's kick off with the first one from anonymous attendee. I'm with you that AI cannot replace our jobs, at least at the moment, but can definitely assist us. But how much do we influence those making hiring and other decisions about this? It's hard enough to get some people to understand my job as it is, let alone explaining how AI can't do it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. The honest answer in all of this is that there is just so much that we don't know about this. I don't think there will be any immediate, impact on anyone. And I see some companies where they're like, "Oh, we plan to replace 1,000 jobs by 2027 with AI or whatever." Like, I think these are all like big claims that no one can really substantiate yet. Why do I say this? Is that what we were talking about earlier about the evolution of the jobs and so on. We really just don't know how this is gonna work out. I'll give you some examples. Like if you think about, let's take accounting as a job, right? Like if you think about what computers are capable of doing, in theory, like the computers can do a lot of accounting very well, but this has not made the job of an accountant obsolete. Accountants are still very valuable to businesses, and they still play a very important role, with a lot of software systems actually helping them out versus the accountants like 60 years ago, or going with pen and paper and keeping books manually. So there, but at the same time, like if you look at another example of like factory workers, for example, there are certain jobs that have been fully replaced by automation. That's true, but then it's not that we have all factories today are running entirely autonomously. There is a different type of work that is being done by humans in these factories and so on. So in my opinion, like no one can answer the question that anonymous attendee is asking today, because we really don't know how the jobs will evolve. I think there will be a sort of exploratory discovery phase until we reach some baseline in what AI offers in jobs and what we have to change. But so as long as you try to stay agile and try to be nimble and make sure that you adapt to the situation, then I think you'll be okay.
That makes sense. Yeah. The accountant example is really good because we've all seen how powerful even spreadsheets are before AI came along. So it's easy to see how, technically that could probably, like, those jobs could probably be covered, but that's not the case at all. There's still very much a need for that. And going back to the points that you raised around productivity and delegating certain things, the people that can embrace that are probably gonna thrive, I would imagine. Awesome.
100%.
So we've got people asking some questions about Hotjar AI. If you'd like to take some questions about that.
Of course, I would love to.
A question that's come up a few times is around language, and whether this is going to be expanded to be able to create questions in different languages or not.
At the moment, it's optimized for English. It has the potential of working with other language, but this is still something that the team is exploring. We just want to make sure that it works as expected for other languages and so on. So there will be, we'll keep you updated on this. So the team will be working on it, and hopefully in future releases, we'll be opening up more and more language support with this right now. But today, I would say it's predominantly English. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Another question, which was covered in the demo, but just to reiterate, if new responses come in, is it possible to then update the report based on those new languages?
Correct, yes. You can always regenerate the report again, and it will take in consideration the latest responses that came in.
Fantastic. And who is this available to? Is this a paid feature? Is this a beta? How can you get access to this?
It's free for everyone today, so everyone can start using it today.
Okay, fantastic. Let me take a look at some other questions that we've got here. Okay, so this is a general AI question. You mentioned that people, let's just skip up. You mentioned that people should become experts in a specific area to be able to harness the power of AI better. As a generalist, I wonder how AI is going to augment my life. Thoughts?
First, I would maybe take a minute to give one point. I don't know where the person is in their career, but I would tell you the career curve that I think is best, in my opinion. That's what I would recommend to other people. I think the curve goes like generalist, specialist, super specialized, and then like generalist again. I think that's kind of like the evolution. Because I feel like in the beginning of your career, it's really important to get as much exposure to different things, to be able to learn a lot of different things. Once you see the thing that you're good at, you need to get great at it. So I think going very, very deep into what you're good at to be, the best at that kind of field is very important. And that will give you that competitive advantage and edge that later on you can move into more of a generalist role where you can have this broader knowledge on more domains. But to answer the question, like how does this work? I still find like my job today is a generalist, and I still find AI to be very useful. But as I mentioned before, and the reason why I explained this career curve, because I want to make a specific point. Like I think if you're early in your career, then you still don't have like that deep expertise and deep knowledge, and that's where you maybe feel a little bit more pressure with the advancement of AI. So this is why, as you advance your career, try to get more specialized and more of an expert on a topic. But if you're later in your career and have already been on that other side of being a journalist, like myself, I don't think that it's and this is not being cocky or anything, but I don't think it is that easy for AI to replace like journalist executives, for example, right? Because of that, different kind of expertise and so on. So that would be the mental model that I would use for it. Like if you manage to get on that other side of that career curve, I think you've already built up enough expertise and depth earlier to be a journalist that actually is on a higher level of knowledge and expertise, and then you use AI to still augment your job in all the different ways to delegate parts of your job to it.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. I don't know if the people of the webinar agree, but I'd never sort of acknowledged that generalist, that makes sense, and going into being super specialist, I saw that, but I didn't see the trend of sort of coming back up to being a generalist afterwards. That's interesting. So I'll go to another question after this, but I'm really curious to know sort of why you think that sort of generalist or sort of return to the generalist once you've got that really specific knowledge helps people and what people tend to achieve. Obviously, you gave the example of an executive, but I'd love to know a little bit more about that.
Your mileage may vary, and by the way, like that, I think that last part of that curve is not necessarily a must. You know, I also see people who continue being specialized and going deeper and deeper as experts, and I think that's actually still super powerful. I think for people who, the reason why I mentioned this, if someone wants to be a generalist, like myself, like I've always wanted to be a generalist later, I feel that if you want to be a journalist, I would rather you don't stay a journalist throughout your career. I think if you stay a journalist through and through, you would not be, you know, you would have some delta in expertise versus someone who has gone through that, you know, depth of being specialized later. But if you're someone who has the intention of later only becoming an expert on something, then you've already chosen your path, right? Like it's your desire to be an expert. So you try to specialize from the beginning and continue to be specialized, and that will give you a very strong edge. So that's why my answer was more to someone who wants to be a journalist. What's your path to becoming a journalist later in your career? You try to go through that niche or that kind of like specialized experience in the middle that will give you a bigger edge later on.
I see. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for explaining that. Let's dive back into the Q&A questions. Okay, so a repeat question that we've been getting over and over again about Hotjar AI is this going to be expanded into other areas of Hotjar? So someone gave an interesting example of, could we have a feature where Hotjar AI can generate sentiment analysis reports on user behavior, for example, clicks, scrolling, cursor movements for a web page? Are we going to get something for heat maps, recordings? People seem very curious about this.
Yeah. What I can say today is we're definitely keen on expanding the reach of AI within our product. So we're definitely right now exploring other opportunities in heat maps and recordings and all parts of the product to see how we can integrate AI. The factors that we reason about when we're doing this are, you know, a couple of very important things. One is, first of all, like, is it feasible? Sometimes the idea of AI is conflated maybe with the idea of like magic. People think that AI can do anything, and it's not true. You know, like there are certain things that AI will not be able to do. Like there are certain things that are not possible. So we're always try to see what's feasible. But most importantly, like, so everyone is definitely looking at what's feasible also in other companies. But what makes us different at Hotjar is we really spend a lot of time thinking about the value and the utility of that AI to our users. I've been looking at a lot of the releases by many other companies of AI in their products, and I've seen actually many examples where the AI feature is a more cumbersome way to do the thing that was done previously through like one click. So it's not just about integrating AI for the sake of saying, hey, this has AI in it right now, we stick the label on it and we try to ride a hype train. That's not our philosophy at Hotjar. We really want to make sure that we give our customers the best utility and the best experience. We want it simple. Like if you've seen the demo that John showed us, it's one click, it just works. It's easy, it's simple, it's right there. So that's really what we want to be the value that we create for our users in every feature that we build, especially AI.
Makes a lot of sense. It's finding ways in which that would be useful, and as a user research company, we're going to be researching that with our users to make sure that what we build is worthwhile. Cool. Thank you for taking us through that. I'm going to take another look through some of the questions that we're getting in, so keep them coming in. Okay, so someone has a question about the programming point that you made earlier. What are some of your recommended programming languages to learn to code to stay with the current times?
Start with any, I would say. I think the programming language wars are a war that have no winners. So just start with any programming language. They're all great. Once you get to a certain level of skill, you would start understanding like the difference and the between the different programming languages, and are they fit for purpose for different use cases and so on. But to get to the point where you really want to differentiate between the different programming languages and the purposes for it, that's a pretty advanced level of programming. But right now, to get started, to understand fundamentals, start with anything that are easy languages like Python, for example, to really get started, or JavaScript, while of course it's a lot more focused today on front-end technologies, but still gets you started, gets you to understand some of the fundamentals of programming. So that's what I would recommend. Pick any.
Great. I love that take of the war of the programming languages will never be won. That feels apt. So we have a question from a researcher. So as a researcher, I find that connecting with the content, people, and stories behind the research is the best way to convey research insights and help stakeholders see familiar problems from a different point of view. How much do you think this capability will matter once research is commoditized with AI? Will AI-generated research be able to excite and change minds?
Interesting question. I don't see why not, to be honest. I don't see why not, because incorporating the stories in the context of the users is also something that I can see AI being able to process and understand and absorb and communicate in a meaningful way. This is different from the human judgment component, I think. So that the storytelling, or like, sorry, let me try to break it up into like maybe 3 components that I'm gonna try to think about. So there is the content and the like the narrative or the information that you want to provide. I think AI would be pretty competitive there. Then there is the component of storytelling. This is where it will be a toss-up. One could argue to say that the fact that you know who the audience is, who the receiver of that information is, this particular person you're trying to, to speak to, like knowing their preferences and so on, you might tailor that narrative and the story to them. But perhaps, with enough information about the person who's on the receiving end, AI can do a lot of that too. But then the art of persuasion, the art of selling, this is where I would find it very difficult for AI to sell. And I think actually, like, I think the art of selling is like such a rare currency today between human beings that like even other humans can't necessarily replace humans who have that skill and have that expertise. So it's a long way, in my opinion, for AI to be able to come and replace that art of persuasion and art of selling. And selling not necessarily as in selling a product, but it can be selling an idea, selling a story, selling an initiative.
Selling the idea of it's bedtime to your children, like that's a difficult sell.
Hard sell.
Great, that makes a lot of sense. I've had a couple of questions here that I don't know how much light you'll be able to shed, but there have been a couple of questions about the legal or regulatory requirements. So are there any legal or regulatory requirements that need to be considered in relation to AI and data privacy as well? Because open AI models are not open source. How can we be sure that our data on Hotjar is safe? If we do use these new AI features, do we need to accept that we have no visibility on how our data is used? Is that something you're able to speak to, or does that need unpacking a little bit further?
Yeah, I think that's a topic we probably could do like a full webinar on, because I think the topic of privacy and security is complicated, but definitely for us at Hotjar, the privacy of our users and their data is priority number 1, 2, and 3. So something we take very, very seriously in terms of also our relationship with with the vendors that we use, and how like any data is transferred to someone. But what we can tell you is that we definitely do not share the data of customers with each other. Like the data is available to you and only to you. But I definitely want to acknowledge also that this being a very nascent field, not just at Hotjar, but like outside of Hotjar, I think it's something that is still very early in the discourse. There are lots of discussions. There are a lot of people on the legal side of things, on the privacy side of things, on the technology side of things, trying to really understand all the parameters of it. So it's an evolving scene, it's an evolving landscape, it's a lot is shifting. So it's very difficult for me to right now to tell you with certainty, like this is how I think the world is gonna look like. But definitely something we are paying very good attention to, and I just want to rest assure everyone that this is for us top of mind and probably like the most important priority right now in terms of how we can bring this kind of value to our customers while respecting their data security and privacy.
That makes a lot of sense. It's a very new field, and yeah, I've seen firsthand the effort that we put into or the priority that we give to data protection and privacy. So I'm confident that we'll navigate that correctly. I'm scanning through the answers here to see, but I think all of the questions that we're seeing, we have covered the answers there. So if anyone on the Hotjar team that's tuning in has spotted anything that I might have missed, or any questions that I haven't addressed, as I say, the questions that I'm seeing in the chat are something that we've covered. We will be sharing a recording of this webinar, so you'll be able to watch this back. Maybe there will be an AI transcript somewhere of the summary of the key points. But I just wanted to thank everybody for coming along and attending. As we said, Hotjar AI surveys is now free to all Hotjar users, so I definitely recommend that you go and check it out, have a play with it, and see how it can save you time and help you get better insights. We'll be sharing the link in the chat for you to go and check that out. And also, our next virtual event is on Thursday, June the 21st, which is next week. And that's with Caitlin Bourillon, and it's all about understanding why customers buy your products and services. So you can check that out. We're also going to put the link in the chat for that as well. So feel free to register if that sounds interesting to you. As Mo mentioned, we had a product hunt launch today for AI, Hotjar AI. So if that's a tool that you use, we'd really appreciate your upvote there to get as many eyes on this as possible. We think it's going to really help people out. And the last thing to do is thank everybody that's tuned in. We've really appreciated spending some time with you today. Mo, I really appreciate your questions, your insights, and taking the time to walk us through this today.
Thank you, John, for the great conversation and for the questions. And thanks everyone for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, give us the upvotes on Product Hunt, but more importantly, try it out. And I hope you like it. And we're always open to your feedback. Please let us know if there are any ways we can improve it or we can make it better. We'd be happy to do that.
100%. Thank you very much for taking the time today, Mo. Thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you at the next virtual event. Take care, everybody.